You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to thewritingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show this week. My name is Chris, or CJ, and I'm sat here with Chris just to make things a bit easier or more awkward, depends on the way you look at it. And we're here for a brand new show with a brand new guest, and we've got a fantastic guest for you tonight, and it's going to be really interesting. And it's been a long week, Chris. How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been relatively quiet on the old Twitter. Just getting my head down, doing a bit of writing and stuff this week. So, yeah, happy days. What about you?
Yeah, yes, I know you've been getting your writing done. We've got a few things we're working on in the background, and you know we're working hard behind the scenes. Our new business is there's emails flying around, and that's kind of the progress we've made so far. One directional emails at the moment. That's not entirely true, but you know. Nothing major come back yet. We are working on a few things behind the scenes, which on Substack, as a paid subscriber, you will see those or get to know that news pretty early on before anybody else. And we'll be announcing a few things very soon, which are quite interesting. But yeah, Chris, it's been a week of hectic work, quite a stressful week, quite a head in the shed kind of week, but I've come through it. I've got back in the ice bath. I got back out for a run yesterday. And productivity is returning to me. So, yeah, it's been a dip this week, but I've looked forward to the show.
That's what you want. When you've got that dip, get in the ice bath, get in the cold showers. I've been doing exactly the same. I thought, I need to bring some life back into the machine, so to speak, this body being the machine. Which, by the way, I was looking at the video beforehand, and it makes me cringe every time.
Yes,
every time I see it. I need to do a new one.
We do. We'll have to do a more in-person type one at Harrogate this time, you know, and we'll try and work it out somehow. Yes, it's definitely right. And we talked about mental health a lot on this show, and we're there to support people with that. And it's a natural process for a lot of people. And I've openly admitted that I go through it quite often, as Chris has. It goes up and down. I've got no sort of real reason as to why that happens that I'm aware of. But we are there for each other and we help each other through it. So again, if you're in that category and you need support with us, then just reach out and chat to us. We're very approachable. But yes, how is your writing going, Chris?
Yeah, that's one of the things that keeps coming out in all the books I'm reading and everything that I'm looking at. It's all about that human connection. And I think with the way that AI is going and people's reliance on that, it's only going to get stronger in the future for that need for connection with people. I was listening to the Stephen Bartlett podcast this week, and he had Simon Sinek on there, and they were talking about AI and how perfect it is and how people are like you. It was really funny actually, because he was talking about how like people he's known for years are then suddenly using words in their emails that they don't use, and the grammar's perfect and things like that. And he was saying that the reliance on AI is taking the humanity out of what it is to be human, basically. So this type of thing, this type of connection is going to be really important. And tonight's guest is obviously coming from the other side of this, I would say spectrum, but male and female. Obviously, she's got a lot of experience and knowledge in her field. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about women's mental health and women's just sorts of thoughts and feelings, because we do explore men's thoughts and feelings quite a lot on the show. So it's good to get the other side and see where the common ground lies and what we're struggling with and what we're facing in the future.
Well, absolutely. And with Time Life, a new book presented above your head, that is also touches on grief and, of course, futuristic technology. So, you know, it should link in perfectly. So with that in mind, let me introduce tonight's guest, and then we'll get her on and have a great chat. So Tonight's guest is a powerhouse of words, ideas, and action. She is an award-winning journalist, best-selling author, speaker, activist, and the co-founder of the Women's Equality Party. Her non-fiction work has tackled everything from monarchy to morality, gender equality to personal grief. And now, with her new novel, Time Life, she takes us on an emotional, time-bending journey that explores love, loss, and the untainted consequences of technology. Critics have called it heartbreaking, brilliant, and genre-defying. She wrote the Sunday Times best-selling book, Charles, The Heart of a King, which Times called breathtaking. Her career is also breathtaking, so please help me in welcoming Catherine Mayer to the show. Hello, Catherine.
Hi there.
How are you doing? And thank you for joining us.
I'm doing fine. Slightly overwhelmed by how breathtaking I'm supposed to be, but I will do my best.
Oh, absolutely. Your career is incredible, and the things you've done and just been involved with, the awards you've won, there's so much that you've kind of ticked off. And, as Chris mentioned, there's a lot we can tap into and we're excited to learn about. And the advice you've got, I'm sure it can go a long way for a lot of people. So again, thank you for joining us. And how have you been? How's your week been?
My week has been incredibly busy, mostly in good ways, but also I'm trying to finish a book. So
yes.
It is a little bit of a tall order to promote one book while being on deadline on another. And for the first time in my life, I'm actually running late on delivery of a book. It's all right. I can say this publicly because my publisher knows, and she's very happy with what I have written and have sent over to her. But I have a habit of actually delivering ahead of deadline, which I know is not a very writerly thing to do, but it's because my roots are in news journalism. And also it's a pleasure principle. I love writing, but I love writing when I'm not worrying about getting it done. And I want to be able to enjoy the process and not do it because somebody's sitting on my shoulder going, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? So normally I manage to do that by being actually ahead of my timetable. But I've had lots of very good reasons for why that hasn't happened this time. And you know, that moment when you're on a big project like that and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and it is not a train coming to flatten you. I am now at that point. I've only got sort of 2.5 more chapters to write of a very long book. So
the question being for me at the moment, then you've written a lot of fiction books and non-fiction now. Which is this in?
This is non-fiction, but actually Time Life is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it. Is I have written a lot of fiction, but I haven't published a lot of fiction. I write fiction for myself and then I put it in drawers and never show it to anyone. And Time Life is the only one I've ever published.
Wow.
I've done other sorts of things that are sort of more in the creative sphere, if you like. People think of I treat them the same way. So for me, it's incredibly important that a non-fiction book is as beautifully written as any piece of fiction. But I have also written performance pieces, and I've written quite a lot of song lyrics and that kind of thing. So this isn't my first foray out of non-fiction, but it is my first full-length novel.
Yeah.
But it's a non-fiction that I'm supposed to deliver, and that has a notional publication date of March of next year, which makes it a bit scary.
When you said it was a very long book, how long are we looking at?
Well, it covers a very broad historical sweep because it's the first time I've returned to the royals, but I'm doing it from a very different perspective. I guess you'd say it's a feminist book. I'm very interested in the portrayal of women and also the absence of women in much of history and actually in much of fiction, the absence of women is very noticeable. When you start noticing what isn't there, it's a really interesting thing. And for me, royal women, a lot of my friends would sort of say, "Oh, I'm not interested in the royals, not my thing." And I am saying to them, if they're feminists, well, actually, you really need to be, because the thing about royal women is they're the only women who are reliably not going to be disappeared from history. You know, Henry VIII tried quite hard to erase some of his wives, but he didn't succeed. And in fact, their mythologies then grew as a result. But the stories we tell about royal women are therefore disproportionately important in terms of the portrayal of women in history. So I'm doing a book that starts with Anne Boleyn and goes all the way through to Meghan. So when I say it's long, it's also been an awful lot of work. I've finished all the sort of historical stuff, but I'm not a historian, and I'm a very deep, if I'm on a subject that I don't know, I'm an immersive researcher. So my God, have I learnt a lot.
Well, with your book, Charles, that was, used a lot of interviews and references for that creation of the book. So is going from the timeline of going back to Anne Boleyn all the way through to Meghan, how different was that sort of researching process for you?
Well, it's quite hard to find eyewitnesses for Anne Boleyn's time, obviously. But no, I mean, it really is difficult. It's because, for example, Anne Boleyn is one of the first, or probably the first royal woman about whom there were dueling biographies written, who was caught in a culture war. And so what you actually see is there's this through line right the way from Anne Boleyn to Meghan. But it means that all of your sources are suspect because they are all fighting on one side of the culture war or the other. In Anne Boleyn's case, of course, it's all around the Reformation, Catholics versus Protestants, as well as, the typical thing of women being pitted against each other. So, you can like Catherine of Aragon or Anne Boleyn, but not both of them. So you have to, and every source is going to have some kind of reason for why it's written the way that it is. And so for me, this is also a history of media, and which is again a subject very close to my heart. And as you may have realized, is a lot of Time Life also has that whole dimension of how we know what we think we know and what happens when systems for truth fall apart.
Wow, that sounds like Anya said in the comments, this book sounds very interesting, and I agree. It must be to see I assume a lot of similarities between these women as time progresses, but also a lot of the hardships they might face are very similar, but the whole world and the economy and everything changes around them. But
so you do get like the parallels with the development of media. So Anne Boleyn, as I say, first queen who's the subject of these dueling biographies, but also she's there in the very early days of printing and increasing literacy. Queen Elizabeth is, the first, is there, the first one who really got the control of image. So she's the sort of master PR, if you like. And then you go through to, somebody like Victoria, whose reign spans the development of the press as we know it now very much, but also right the way through still photography and film. She's actually caught on film. She's, which is kind of astonishing anyway. And so you see there are certain commonalities, including that pretty much a huge amount of what we think we know about these women is not true. It's myth making, and it's myth making often for a purpose, and it's often myth making that does not do any favors to women. So for me, it's I think people look at what I've written and they can't work out why one person would write on all these apparently very disparate subjects. But for me, I'm always interested in the same things, is the gap between what we think we know and what we do know. And that's with Time Life was very much, part of it as well.
So with a lot of myth making in the histories of these women, how do you decide, because I'm assuming there's quite a few different types of myths and stories out there, how do you decide which kind of stories to work on in that novel?
In the novel or the new book?
In the one you're working on currently. In
the nonfiction. I deliberately, I knew I couldn't do every royal woman from Anne Boleyn to Meghan, so I chose all the ones about where there is the biggest gap between what we think we know and who they are, but also where it did track with the rise of different kinds of media and backdrops that were particularly interesting and relevant for today. So, for example, Queen Charlotte, who, of course, features in Bridgerton, and people now think they know about Queen Charlotte, but she's a really interesting one. She's the first one to describe the kind of arc, or not the first one, but she describes the kind of arc that is very familiar to us with modern royal women, where she's very popular when she's first married and doing what she's supposed to do and being very quiet and producing tons of children. But the moment that her husband, that's the madness of King George, the moment that he begins to lose control and she gets closer to power, the whole public attitudes to a woman close to power shift. And she becomes the target of caricaturists, very famously, all these different cartoons where she's rendered a hag. But there's also then, when Meghan came on the scene, there was this idea, which is actually not well founded at all, but this idea that Charlotte was somehow mixed race, and that whole myth gets revived, and you see it then in Bridgerton and in the spin-off Queen Charlotte series. So that's one of the other things about myths, is that they keep cycling through, and you find them right the way through to today.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So if we go back, then that's obviously a lot of inspiration behind, inspiration from your journalism days and that sort of sense of research and writing. So if we go back, to before that started, what was the inspiration to get into journalism? Because I guess that's where your writing journey kind of started, was it?
Actually, I think my writing journey started when I was tiny.
Yeah.
I come from a family we traveled a lot. I was born in America, which is why I have a weird accent. I have a weird accent because I was born in America and I lived in quite a lot of different places. So I just picked up what I heard. And it meant we kept moving schools, but also both of my parents loved books, and my father used to read us stories, which I then look back on, and I think it's incredible what he was reading us. He read us things like he read us Greek mythology, and or he'd read us Jane Austen or whatever when we were tiny kids, and he would do it in episodes to make it exciting and leave you on cliffhangers. And so then I got sent to a school here when we first came here, to a primary school, and it was at the stage, or maybe a nursery even, because it was at the stage where kids were just learning to write. And they gave everyone a notepad and said, can you write a story about, I don't know, you write us a nice little story. And I filled the whole book and then asked for another one. And I wrote a story about a mermaid. I still remember the story, and it was about a mermaid wanting to break free from being a mermaid. and I wrote like 2 whole exercise books full, and I did that all the way through childhood and then at school. And I was really bad at maths, and I used to trade doing English homework for people in return for them helping me with my maths.
Nice.
And I just love I don't know. I mean, do you actually love writing? Because I mean, for me, it's the luckiest thing in the world to have discovered something I love this much.
Absolutely. Yeah, we both self-published authors, and it's something we do for passions, and that's entirely why this show exists. So yeah, we're on you with that one. This interview is going to be difficult to navigate because you've done so much and you've won awards for doing so much. So the question I want to ask is, having been a journalist, a novelist, an activist, and all of those different things, when someone asks you, maybe if you meet them for the first time, and they ask you, what do you do? How do you respond to that?
I have 2 responses. I either say I'm a recovering journalist.
Yeah.
I say that writing is my day job, because that's true. I mean, that you can do all those hyphenate things. If I hyphenate, it's not exactly like actress, model, whatever. So I'm not going to I mostly just don't. I'm not as forthcoming as I probably should be.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to. The real truth is I don't know how to answer. So it might depend who it was. But one of the funny things about the world is, I also find people are weirdly incurious. So I went last year. I have a friend who's who, this is one of these things by chance. We knew each other before either of us became sort of well-known writers, and he's like a mega best-selling writer. He's much more successful than I am. And we were for a time represented by the same agents, and we went to their Christmas party together, and a man came sort of barreling up to this friend of mine and just automatically assumed I was the wife, and as the wife didn't ask me one question about me, and I was just standing there thinking how kind of sad and funny and predictable that all was. But it's actually quite restful as well, because that incuriosity that takes one look at you and assumes that you don't have anything interesting to say, it's the perfect thing when you're collecting material. I think where I will always be a journalist or always a novelist, whichever way you look at it, is I'm always scanning. This is a weird format because I'm supposed to talk, and I can't do the thing I love best besides writing, which is actually not saying very much at all and looking around and listening and taking in what people are doing and being intensely curious, possibly nosy.
Yeah.
So, Catherine, I'm really interested. Obviously, you said about writing fiction from a young age, primary school, filling notebooks. Why did it take you so long for Time Life to come out as your first piece of fiction, especially if you were writing for so long? What was it that made you think, this is the book that I want to take out of the drawer and put into the world?
Well, I almost didn't publish this one. So the story about this book I should tell you because it's so weird, quite apart from anything else. But I think one thing is that life got in the way. I mean, even though I've now lost ridiculous numbers of people that I love, I'm lucky to have had ridiculous numbers of people that I love. And I had a very, very fun existence, married to a musician who I loved, but it also meant that because we were married, I would do things like go off on tour with him and whatever while doing this incredibly busy job. So I was always finding the time to do things on top of the intensive work and social life was always a bit tricky. And I always thought I will do it, but the thing about nonfiction is you get commissioned for it. Whereas novels, unless you're already an established novelist, as you will know, they don't tend to, they want to see what you've written. So I kept being commissioned to write nonfiction books, and I loved doing that. And I would always think, oh, well, I'll get round to writing a novel. And then somebody would come and, they come to me with the nonfiction. I've never actually pitched. This is awful to admit, but I've never pitched a book. It's always people asking me to do it. And so Time Life was completely the other way around. I just finally was so overwhelmed with the need to write this story. And I was on a tour, but I was on my husband's tour bus. They were touring the States. And although I said that was a kind of exciting life, actually, it's really quite boring touring with a rock band. Unless you really love sound checks. It's I would love the gigs, but there's an awful lot of sitting about. So I would always be doing something else. And I had my computer and I just started writing Time Life in the back of the tour bus. And that was February 2019. By the way, I'd written the year before I'd gone on tour with them, and I'd written a one-woman show. So, I mean, I had form for using the time in the back of the tour bus. And in fact, I wrote part of, unlikely though it sounds, I wrote quite a lot of the now King Charles biography on the side of a stage and in the back of a tour bus, which I don't think people would expect. But anyway, so I started writing this story, and I had been obsessed with H.G. Wells's The Time Machine for most of my life, but I was also obsessed with the absence of women in that story. So H.G. Wells is so interesting because so much that he, like a lot of speculative fiction or sci-fi writers, he was very good at anticipating the future, a lot better than a lot of journalists are. But he also he was very dismissive of people who were other as far as he was concerned, and that included women. So in The Time Machine, there's a housekeeper who's known as the housekeeper, whose main function is to walk backwards. So you know that he's going the opposite direction in time. And there's also this very shrinking violet woman of the future called Weena. And I wanted to sort of redo the story, but with center female characters in it. But I was one of the other things I've done is I ran a think tank about emerging technologies. So I've been thinking about things like generative AI. I've been thinking and researching it, researching it for way longer than lots of people. And so I was very aware of people like Elon Musk, and Sam Altman, and all of those people who are changing our world. And I had this idea, well, what would one of them do with a time machine? And I thought, well, what would I do with a time machine? And I had not at that stage lost some of the key people I'd lost, but I'd lost my best friend and my stepsister and several other people close to me in a really short space of time, and I was hurting. And so I thought, well, I'd probably use it to try and save them or try and visit them or something, was the idea. And I thought, but one of those technologists, he'd use it to exploit the resources of the future. So that was the starting point. So I wrote this on the back of the tour bus, started it. By the end of 2019, I'd written about 50,000 words of it. And I needed in my plot, I needed a reason why the time traveler, who was a technologist called Elo Halvaran, why he and the narrator, who, like as in the original Time Machine, the narrator is a journalist, but in this case is a former Time magazine journalist, as I am, though it's very much not me, but it's a female narrator who used to work at Time. And I needed a device for how when they got to the future, they would not know, she would not necessarily believe she was in the future, and would be held in a place that was a kind of holding zone. And I started thinking, oh, well, it's some kind of quarantine. And I was thinking about ideas being dangerous. So I invented a pandemic. And I was writing, so this is 2019, I'm writing a novel about a technologist getting way too close to the levers of power. I'm writing about someone who is not me but does the same job that I used to do, using a time machine to try and save the love of her life who is dying because of a pandemic. And I'm writing about a pandemic. And then in early 2020, my husband died of COVID, and I put the book away and I could not look at it until I didn't get it out again. And I may well never have looked at it again. But then one morning I woke up and Elon Musk was in the process of buying Twitter. And I went, oh my God, didn't I write that as well? And I went back and looked, and I had Elo O'Halloran buying a social media company called Fleet. And I'd written all of this in 2019. So then at that point, I thought, this book wants to be written. And so I finished it, and I actually scaled back. Weirdly, I had described the pandemic with such bizarre precision in so many different ways, but I scaled it back because I didn't want this to be a pandemic novel. I wanted, it's in there, but it's not a response to it. But what it is about is it's about love and grief, but it's also about it's about technologists and technology, and the idea that technology can that what you need to fix the problems caused by technology is more technology.
Yeah. You don't secretly, unknowingly travel in a time machine when you're asleep, do you?
Do you know what? There's so many weird things that I haven't even told you half of what I predicted that's in the book, including, I mentioned that Weena is the name of the character in the original Time Machine. So I called this very important character in the book, who's a woman in the future, Rowena, who is anything but a shrinking violet. But she's called Rowena anyway. But that's why I called her Rowena, is because of Weena. And then I was listening to a podcast about Elon Musk and a legal battle that he'd got involved in. And, Elo O'Halloran is not Elon Musk, but clearly I was drawing on some of what I was observing with him. Anyway, he got involved in an argument with online with somebody who had helped rescue those boys who were trapped in a cave in Thailand. And there was a process where at one point there were investigators set to looking at this man and finding out what they could find out on behalf of Elon Musk. And they called it, for reasons that I still haven't been able to determine, Project Rowena. And I have, because my character is called Rowena, Elo O'Halloran sets up something called Project Rowena in my book. And you just kind of go, that is so random. I mean, utterly random. I have no idea how some of this stuff happens. So yes, maybe I time travel in my sleep.
I think you should look into that. Maybe you've got an untapped talent there as well. Another talent. Yeah, brilliant. Wow, fascinating. So you mentioned that you were born in America and then you moved to the UK. Where you are in the UK right now, do you engage much with writers in the real world, or is it kind of an online platform for you, or do you have a social and virtual kind of connection?
No, I engage with writers a lot, but also I co-founded a festival for writers, Prima Donna, which again, that came out of my direct experience of being, I was lucky enough to I've had several bestsellers, and when you have bestsellers, the experience, I realize it's this really privileged experience, but it also shows you how limited it is and what a closed shop it is, because what would happen is that I'd be invited to all the festivals and whatever, and I'd go around on this circuit, and it would be the same few people on the circuit. And it's like, you may as well, I don't know, you may as well be taking London with you, and not just London, but this tiny, tiny slice of London. And it's basically, there aren't that many women, so they would put me on loads of things. But it's nearly all posh white men of a certain age is the kind of key thing. I mean, yeah, I mean the lack of it's also that it's the big publishers. So indie publishers aren't getting anything like the same, and yet they're producing some of the most interesting work and whatever. So in 2019, which was a busy year, as you gather, I co-founded a festival called Prima Donna, which the whole idea was to bring in voices from the margins. And generally, we have managed to put about 80% of the people on stage are women, but also there's a really high proportion of writers from different backgrounds who are writing for indies and whatever. But the most exciting thing for me was that the audiences, many of them, that really high proportion were first-time festival goers, because the other thing you would realize on that circuit is that it's all the same people.
Yeah.
I don't think that's good for publishing at all. And what people like me who have been lucky, who have got that access, I think it's incumbent on us to try and open it up for other people. So one of the things that we did, for example, was we would put really big name authors on stage with new writers. So I remember Elif Shafak, for example, coming to our first festival. And of course, she's a very big best-selling author. And we had her on stage with 2 other writers who probably on their own, they would have certainly generated interest, but nothing like the crowd. And therefore it's such a good platform. And yeah, I mean, it's what I feel we should do. I mean, this year, for the first time, I spoke at both the London Book Fair, which is of course a huge corporate thing. It's a trade fair. And it's completely commercial. That's what it's meant to be. This great big commercial event. But I also spoke at the Alternative London Book Fair, which is the indie book fair. And the difference was so stark, because there were the Alternative Book Fair is, of course, full of writers. And it's full of writers who want to talk about their work and want to talk about the process and want to talk about getting published. And the London Book Fair is full of books as commodities, which of course they are. And I'm a beneficiary of that, but it's even so, I don't think it's healthy. And I think we're also seeing a retrenchment in the same way that in the wider world, things like, DEI are becoming dirty words and whatever. You're seeing this kind of flight back to a much more conservative model of doing things and much less interest in opening up things, everyone shutting down again. So yeah, I think we all need to stand. I mean, that's why what you're doing is so great. It's really important to stand against these things and to create platforms.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Catherine, obviously that's hugely inspiring, and obviously Halo mentioned about it being a beautiful mission. I think my question from that is, with all the grief and everything that you've experienced, how have you managed to navigate that grief and continue to have a positive impact in the world when you've had so many problems in your life in terms of the losses that you've had and things like that?
It's an interesting one. Everybody grieves differently. All I can say is that I found that grief made me aware. As I said, it made me aware of my luck as well, in terms of, my husband and I loved each other for 30 years. So when he died, and of course I was locked down as well, and my stepfather died only a few weeks before, very probably of COVID too, but it was so early on that people didn't kind of realize what was happening at that point. And so what happened was that I found that I was my impulse was actually to turn my energies outwards. So one of the very first things I did is, do you remember in lockdown, there was a particular name for these things, but they're basically community groups sprang up in which people were organizing to make deliveries to other people and whatever. And I started a hashtag, how can I help? And within about 24 hours, this is like literally weeks after being widowed, within about 24 hours, I was organizing thousands of volunteers to deliver things. It only lasted a short while because then there were much more organized forms of this, and I just passed it on to one of those. But I recognize that as a sort of impulse to turn outwards. But that may also be related to writing, because writing, of course, is a process of digging inwards. And, Time Life is very obviously, I think, quite grief-soaked, though hopefully not entire, it's not meant to be sad, but I think you feel the loss in it. And so I suppose the answer is that I balance, that I sort of find some weird balance. I also joined COVID Bereaved Families for Justice. I got involved in creating, helping with the COVID memorial wall to get some kind of status for that, and campaigning to get the COVID inquiry and all of that. So I don't know. I just think it's my impulse. I'm one of those people who, if I can see something that needs to be done, my first impulse is to figure out whether I can do it. Or just leap in.
I was trying to find one of the awards you've won on my notes that I've put down, but I can't find it. You were one of the most influential women in, was it the UK, in the top 50?
Oh God, I've been put on lots of these lists, but they're not as distinguished as they sound, because there was definitely one of those kind of most influential people lists I was on, and I went to a party where we were all supposed to be being influential together, and they got a picture of me sort of shrinking away from Nigel Farage. So there's influence and there's influence, isn't there?
I agree, but the way I'm listening to you tell your story, it is in your nature to be influential and to be helpful in communities, which is absolutely something, as you mentioned, we agree on and we wish more people were like. So, if someone was kind of like yourself in that moment, shying away from everything, because a lot of writers kind of do that, but they wanted to become more influential and help people in the community and things like that. What advice have you got for them if they've never taken that step?
I think writing is a solitary profession. I mean, particularly book writing. And so I think even if people aren't trying to influence, they should be aware of the dangers of introversion. It is always good to build community one way or the other. I've really enjoyed, people do their own book clubs and those sorts of things. And I think those are really fun when there are actual writers involved in them, or people who are interested in the process of writing. We did another thing that happened during lockdown. Of some friends and people I didn't know but are now friends started a Monday night poetry group, and it's like, I don't know when about you, but I couldn't remember when I'd last sat down and read poetry. but there we were all kind of sitting, having these, the kind of supposed Zoom parties that were desperately grim and whatever. And the poetry group was really fun because every week somebody people took it in turns to choose a poet that we were going to look at. And mostly the work was short enough that you could actually just read the work out and then discuss the work. And then of course you'd end up talking about all sorts of other stuff. But it would end up being something really important in those days. It was a discussion of ideas rather than a discussion of COVID, which everyone was doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think building your own is a good thing to do on a small scale. I'm not trying to suggest other people, disrupt their lives as successfully as I tend to do. I co-founded the Women's Equality Party with Sandy Toksvig, and her wife makes us promise that we're not going to found anything else, because whenever we're also best friends, and whenever we kind of get together, we're always going, we've got to do this. And her wife comes in and goes, no, nothing new. But yeah, sorry, go on, I'm rambling.
It's all right. I was going to say, you strike me as somebody, obviously, who, when they see wrongs in the world, wants to try and right them.
Yeah.
What would your fear be, I suppose, for women in the future, with all the rises in technology that we've had, with the way that women have been suppressed throughout history? What are you concerned with, and how do you think they could rectify those potential issues?
Actually, I'm really glad you asked that, and I'm going to go deadly serious for a moment. I think we are living at. I'm really old now. I'm 64, and so I would be heading towards pensionable age, if not already in pension in a previous world, and it means that I have lived long enough that I have seen myself a huge amount of social and technological change and political change. And I remember very well, for example, the 1970s and what that felt like here, and the rise of the far right then. That is nothing to where we are now. The other reason that I wrote Time Life is it's a warning. It's a warning about the intersections of, mainstream media is failing. It will cease to exist in the forms that we know it, or many of the forms that we know it, very, very soon. And such mainstream media as there has lost trust. People believe everything and nothing. People who believe everything and nothing are remarkably vulnerable to populism. And populism is very, very good at harnessing the turbulence of technological change. And then technology is there with these things like generative AI that could, in fact, create this whole podcast from scratch, and do it so well that we wouldn't even know that we hadn't said those things. So you are in this very dangerous place. And of course, across the world, it's not just Trump and, Poland and, what's going to happen in Holland and what's going to happen here. Marine Le Pen getting ready in France. That has huge implications for all of us. But for women, you're already seeing reproductive rights being rolled back. You're already seeing one of the things out of that kind of populist right playbook is to romanticize a world that never was. And in that world that never was, women were at home being homemakers, being the happy housewives waiting for the husband to come home, and being great mothers and carers. And what happens is this is returning, this notion of women, and it is returning with a loss of rights, with you know, as I say, the on reproductive rights. It's terrifying. And I just want people to understand this is not business as usual. We are heading into a very scary world. So it's not just that I think on personal levels and as writers, it's good to build community. I think it's the only sensible thing to do for survival. And that community also becomes our survival network, our refuge, and potentially where we organize from, because God knows what's going to happen. So I'm sorry to be a bit bleak there, but I really do believe that.
They're the answers we're looking for. I mean, the truth is what we want to talk about on this show, and that includes hard things to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're talking about the rise in technology and social media and platforms like that. And just over the past 5 years alone, I've seen the sort of, obviously we talk a lot about men and the direction that men seem to be being pushed towards, but equally when I see that direction and the rise in like incel culture and young men and things like that, obviously I automatically think, well, what's the other side of the coin, and how are people going to face that, and what do we do to sort of combat it? Have you got sort of any ideas? Obviously building a community and a strong community is a good starting point, but what else can people do in order to navigate those potential problems, and how can we as men on the other side of the coin help educate young men in that space as well?
Interestingly, I think we're already doing it, because I think storytelling is a big part of the answer. So that's also why I went to fiction, which was the bit of the question I didn't answer before, because having started a political party and worked, you know, for 10 years as the president of a political party, I was very aware of politics being, you know, as they say, not just about policies, but about how people feel. And storytelling is the thing that gets most directly to what people feel. So they're kind of gut responses to things. And part of what's going on is a kind of dehumanization process. So with the young men, they are being encouraged to see women as meat again, you know, something that we thought that we were moving away from. There are many, it's not just incel culture, there are many cultures that encourage that sort of dehumanization. Racism is based in dehumanization. It's the idea that people of one set of people being less than another, and in some ways being animals rather than full humans. And so one of the best ways to counter that is with stories that make people see through other eyes. And I mean, funnily enough, I haven't seen that program called Adolescence that attracted so much attention. I will watch it at some point. It divided my set of friends between people who thought it was very good and people who thought it was, funnily enough, too narrow in its view in terms of being told from the male viewpoint. But if it's effective, I think, you know, that's important. That's for me, the key thing. And so with Time Life, I wanted to tell a story that would really be an exciting story that would grip you emotionally, and you'd want to know what happens next and whatever. But that at the end of it, you would come out thinking differently about what's happening in the world with technology, or thinking, you know, which is, it could be a very dry subject. So again, if you talk to people about why it matters to pay for care properly, for example, that can be an incredibly dry subject. Whereas if you tell a story of somebody who is caring, then it's a completely different thing. With incels, with the sort of the idea of the relationships between men and women being broken down again, if you tell that in story form, I'm sure you're doing a lot more, you're going to reach a lot more people on a deeper level than you will if you just try and lecture them about it.
Mm.
And my only other bit of advice there is never ever try and change people's minds on social media, because you entrench people's minds rather than changing them, and you amplify exactly the messages that you're trying to combat.
Mm. Do you find, as somebody who does go back and look at how a narrative is created around a certain person, do you find any particular elements there terrifying? Because if they've managed to sell that narrative that then becomes everyone's conscious sort of thoughts around that person, does it show how easy it is to construct that type of narrative around an individual? And is that quite a scary thing to discover and go, actually, they've missed this bit, they've not sort of explored this bit?
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons. As I said, Elo Halvoran is not Elon Musk, but Elon Musk, one of the reasons I was watching him with interest and alarm was because there is a kind of cult of believers around him. And one of my former colleagues at Time, Walter Isaacson, wrote this biography, and everything is wrong with that biography, even that he had extraordinary access. He's a great writer, Walter Isaacson. He's a perceptive man, but he's gone for an archetype, and the archetype is the flawed genius archetype. And I don't actually think that Musk is that bright. And I think the moment you actually, he has a particular narrow form of intelligence, but he doesn't understand the world, nor does he care to, because he's trying to bend it to his will rather than the other way around. And so for me, it's very scary, but it relates to stereotypes and archetypes that people will more easily believe in men as flawed geniuses, and they will more easily. I mean, there are all sorts of interesting things going on. You get women leading some of the far right parties, and that's women giving a kind of apparently smiling and friendly face to the far right. And you have to kind of start deconstructing what's going on in the world and working out why it is. But a lot of it is to do with myth making and pressing buttons that already exist. So again, we as writers, we can do the opposite. We can unpress the buttons, or we can, like in The Wizard of Oz, we can pull back the green curtain.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay. This is so fascinating that we can keep going down this route, and some of the comments coming in are fantastic, and I'm sure we are all very interested in this, but we've nearly run out of time and we haven't asked any of our staple questions. And there was one from Anya earlier, so I want to ask that, and then we'll ask our staple questions. If you guys have any more questions for our guests, please do send them in now, and I'll try and squeeze them in very quickly. Anya says, out of all of Henry VIII's wives, did Anne of Cleves play her cards, pun intended, the most intelligently? I can't even say that intelligent word. That's clever. She says, I think so.
It's that's mostly true. But the notion of her being a survivor is sadly not as true as it should be, because she just died really young. So she managed to get kind of reasonably well paid off and installed. But there are two things that I would say slightly mitigate against her being the happy survivor that she's sometimes depicted as. One is that she died almost immediately afterwards, and the other is that she really seems to have thought she had a chance of remarrying Henry, and to have tried to do that. I didn't research her as deeply as some of the others, but that's one of the people it's so interesting you asked that, because I think she's such an interesting character, and I want to do a separate book on her.
Thank you for the question. Halo's got a great question here, and it's probably one that's very overlooked, and it shouldn't be. But it says, what is the simplest kindness one person can give another that is easy to incorporate into busy life?
To see and hear them, to people, when I've been struggling with grief, it's not the people who put their head on one side and go, "And how are you?"
Yeah.
It's the people who understand that you don't necessarily want to discuss how you are, but who work out what it is you might need and do it for you anyway. People, that you might need taking it. Just be as perceptive as you can be. It's not always easy, but look at people properly.
It's a great sort of answer. And one thing it reminds me of is how we all so busy and caught up in social media and things like that, is where you're sat and with people you see every day. It could be a partner, your brother, your sister, your mother, anybody you sit with quite regularly, and they tell you something, and 9 times out of 10 people these days are on their phone and they're not really paying attention to what that person's saying. And just practice for the next few days, putting that down and turning and facing them and actually listening to that conversation. It changes everything. We've just become so caught up in that technology, as we're talking about, that's happening too often.
If you go on any of my social media, you'll find I've posted a couple of videos in the last couple of weeks from Sandy, who's running to be Chancellor of Cambridge. And she actually starts, the newest of the videos, she starts with the story about people being on their phones and not noticing somebody.
There you go.
Let me recommend that video to you.
Yeah, please do that. Okay, we'll squeeze in. We've just gone over time. Are you okay to carry on for a couple of minutes?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Chris, let's start our staple questions and we'll wrap this up so Catherine can go and chill out with her Friday evening.
Yeah, if you could take one character from fiction and make that character your own, which character would you choose and why?
That's a funny one for me because, of course, I've kind of done it with the time traveler in Time Life. But I also, when I was growing up, Little Women was one of those books that had quite an impact on me as a child, and I identified with Jo March. But I didn't like what happened with her in the plot development. So I'd take her over, but then I'd do different things with her.
Which is kind of similar to the next question, which is, and it's open to TV, film, and books. If you could change the ending to anything, what ending would you change and why?
It is, yeah. I guess you're right that in some ways I've answered that one, because yes, I'd probably not have her running the school with Professor Bear with all the children running around. I'd have her actually be a bloody writer. That's what she wanted to be.
But then how would that like just happily ever after story then, and just writing books sat in a nice little office? I
don't really believe in happily ever after. Is my other problem with fiction is like, the thing that's interesting about life is no, you don't understand the meaning of a life until it's ended, and even then that meaning can keep changing. So happily ever after is a cop-out. But I think, there are lots of me rewriting The Time Machine is also part of a kind of literary trend at the moment of it's been going on for ages, women rewriting or writing new versions of existing stories. So like, I love The Wide Sargasso Sea, the Jean Rhys novel, that is what happened before Jane Eyre. And there's lots of rewritings of Greek mythology and whatever. And I think there is almost none, there are almost no stories that you couldn't really have fun changing the end. But if we go back to Little Women, maybe they could all go off and form a writers' commune together. That's a terrible answer.
So, Catherine, the last question that we have is quite a morbid one, but it ties in quite nicely with the things that you've talked about in terms of life and appreciation for life. But you're on your deathbed, you're looking back at your writing career. What would you be happy with? What is success to you?
It's funny, when I wrote, one of the other reasons I think I didn't want to publish Time Life is because I've spent my whole life saying the one thing I haven't done yet is publish a novel. And now I've taken away the one thing that I haven't done. But now, of course, that I've published it, I want everyone to read it, and I want it to do well, which, it probably won't, because this isn't false modesty. I personally think it's a wonderful book, or I wouldn't have put it out there, because I won't put things out. I'm a perfectionist. But it's with, although HarperCollins has done the audiobook, the main publisher is an indie publisher, and I am up against all the problems that I wouldn't normally have with my nonfiction. So I guess I will be happy on my deathbed if I can look back and not only see that a significant number of people have read it, but that it actually maybe changed them a little bit, or changed, changed their lives a little bit. Shouldn't we all just want to be able to look back and think we made the world a bit of a better place?
Absolutely. Great answer.
Catherine, before we go, where can people find everything about you in terms of social media and your internet and all those good things?
I wish I had it all nicely centralized. I do have a website, which is catherinemeyer.co.uk, I think. And I am on Instagram as Mayor of London, which, and I'm on most things either as Mayor of London or just my own name. And Mayor of London is really funny, because I've been Mayor of London for a really long time. And these days people pick fights with me and they think I'm Sadiq Khan. I'm really, really not. And of course I'm spelt Mayor of London, not Mayor of London. But,
I did chuckle when I saw that. Yeah.
But literally people start going on at me about the congestion charge.
Brilliant. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us and telling us, I'd say, a big part of your story, because I know there's so much more to dig into there. The Charles book and everything like that. There's so much more we could talk about. And
I've got one other thing to, I don't know if I can't give you a link, can I? I was going to say the other thing is, I wrote a single that's on the audiobook. I don't even know if you know this. There's a band called Rear Window that have a wonderful album called Happiness by Design, and the single off that album is called Rocket Men, and it is actually, I co-wrote it with the band, and it is the theme tune to Time Life, but it's much more obviously kind of taking a pop at the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses and whatever, because it's about people saying my rocket is bigger than your rocket. And that's on all the music streaming things. So Rocket Men by Rear Window, just for fun.
Pass that link on to us, and when we share the show around with all the description, the link to your website and all that stuff we'll put in there, we'll put that link in there as well, so they can check it out, because that sounds fantastic. Brilliant. Yes, there's still so much we could have talked about, and I really would have enjoyed that, and so would Chris and everybody watching. But I just want to say thank you from me. It's been wonderful to hear your story, and this book sounds fantastic. People in the audience said they're going to look into it because they're really interested. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great weekend. And I'll pass you over to Chris to finish this off.
No, again, I would just reiterate everything that Chris said. I think your knowledge is invaluable. And I think obviously people who watch or listen back to this show will find it extremely helpful. So thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Oh, it was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Look after yourselves. Have an amazing weekend and a great week. And we'll see you next week for another show. Bye-bye.